Sonic the Hedgehog is one of the most recognizable characters in gaming history, not just because he's fast, not just because he's iconic, but because Sonic represents something most franchises eventually lose, the willingness to change even when that change is uncomfortable. And yet, over the last decade, Sonic has felt hesitant, like a franchise constantly asking permission from its own past. Today, I want to talk about where Sonic is right now, what the most recent games do well, where they still stumble, and why, despite its reputation, Sonic '06 remains one of the most important games in the franchise's history. Not because it succeeded, but because it tried. And by the end of this video, I want to ask a hard question. Can Sega still create a Sonic game that truly progresses the franchise, or has Sonic game development become a statement about fear, compromise, and creative retreat? If you like lore, analytical content, breakdowns, commentary with depth, you'd feel at home here. Consider subscribe. Let's get into the video. Now, before we talk about modern Sonic, we need to talk about the era where Sonic had something modern games often lack: direction. The early to mid 2000s Sonic games weren't perfect, far from it, but they shared a defining trait. They knew what they wanted to be. This was the era of Sonic and the Secret Ring, Sonic and the Black Knight, Sonic Unleashed, and of course Sonic '06. And importantly, it was also the era of what many fans still consider the definitive Sonic voice. You may not know his name, and honestly you don't need to, but his performance gave Sonic weight, confidence, maturity, a sense that Sonic wasn't just a mascot, but a character who stood for something. The Sonic in this era wasn't embarrassed to be sincere. In Secret Rings and Black Knight, Sonic was placed into mythological frameworks, Arthurian legend, Arabian folklore. These weren't jokes or ironic backdrops. The games took these worlds seriously, even when their mechanics struggled to keep up. Black Knight in particular understood Sonic on a thematic level. Sonic rejects destiny not because he's afraid of it, but because stagnation is worse than death. That is one of the most Sonic ideas imaginable and is delivered through apology. Then there's Sonic Unleashed, a game that is still underappreciated for how much it got right. The boost gameplay finally captured the fantasy of speed in 3 dimensions. The world felt global, colorful, alive. Sonic felt like a hero moving across cultures and continents, not just levels on a menu. Yes, the Werehog slowed things down. Yes, pacing suffered, but Unleashed believed in itself. It wasn't chasing trends, it wasn't afraid of tone, and that belief set the stage for the most controversial Sonic game ever made. Let's talk about Sonic '06. Sonic '06 is broken. It's literally broken. It's unfinished. It's shipped in a state that should never have left development. But Sonic '06 is also ambitious in a way Sonic games no longer are. This game attempted to be a full-scale, narrative-driven, next-generation Sonic epic. Multiple playable characters with interwoven stories, a serious tone, cinematics that wanted to elevate Sonic into the same dramatic space as other AAA franchises of its time. And when Sonic '06 works, even briefly, you can see the future Sega could have had. Now, the story isn't perfect, but it tries to treat Sonic like a mythic figure. The themes of time, sacrifice, identity, and inevitability are not surface-level ideas. Shadow's storyline in particular stands out as one of the strongest narratives the franchise has ever produced. The problem wasn't the vision, the problem was execution. Rushed development, split teams, unrealistic deadlines, technical instability, all of it collapsed under its own weight. Sonic '06 didn't fail because it aimed too high. It failed because Sega didn't give that ambition the time it needed. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sega learned the wrong lesson from Sonic '06. Instead of learning how to support ambition, they learned how to avoid it. After Sonic '06, Sega entered what I call the course correction era. Games like Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations were tighter, safer, and better received, and understandably so. They focused on controlled experiences, humor, and nostalgia, but something was lost in that transition. Sonic began to feel less like a character and more like a brand. Stories became self-aware, stakes were lowered, humor replaced sincerity. The franchise started to feel embarrassed by its own past attempts at seriousness, and that brings us to modern Sonic. Sonic Frontiers is without question the most important Sonic game in years. It finally answers a question fans have been asking for decades. What happens when Sonic is placed into a large, open environment designed around movement? Frontier succeeds in capturing moment-to-moment freedom. The sense of speed across open terrain feels good. The combat is more involved than expected. The tone is quieter, more reflective, and almost melancholic at times. For the first time in a long time, Sonic feels grounded, but Frontiers also feels unfinished in spirit. The world design is functional but often visually repetitive. The open zones feel like prototypes rather than fully realized spaces. The game constantly interrupts itself with 2D and cyberspace sections that feel like reminders of older formulas rather than natural extensions of the new one. Frontiers doesn't fully commit to being an open world Sonic game. It experiments, but with a safety net. And then comes the most confusing part. So after Frontiers, Sega pivoted backwards with Sonic Superstars, and this is where the question becomes unavoidable. What is Sonic supposed to be? Superstars isn't a bad game, but its existence raises concerns. After finally testing the waters of 3D progression again, Sega retreats to a familiar 2D format, something safe, nostalgic, comfortable. This isn't evolution, it's hesitation. It feels like Sega is afraid to fully commit to any direction, afraid that one misstep will undo years of rebuilding trust, and that fear may be the greatest obstacle Sonic faces. Not fear from fans per se, but fear from the people steering the franchise, fear of backlash, fear of another Sonic 06 level narrative, fear that ambition will once again be punished rather than understood. You can feel that fear in the way Sonic Superstar exists as a kind of creative insurance policy. It's polished, familiar, and intentionally non-threatening, a game designed less to say something and more to avoid saying the wrong thing. The problem is that fear doesn't just prevent failure, it prevents identity. When a franchise is constantly looking over its shoulder, it stops asking questions about what it wants to be and starts asking what it's allowed to be. Sonic Superstars feels like a response to uncertainty rather than a declaration of direction, and that uncertainty bleeds into how the franchise is perceived. Is Sonic a forward-moving 3D action platformer evolving with modern design philosophies, or is he a retro icon safest when confined to the past? Until Sega answers that question with confidence, every new Sonic release risks feeling like a compromise rather than a vision. And Sonic, a character built on momentum, cannot afford to stand still because stagnation, more than a failure, is what truly threatens his future. So where does that leave Sonic? Can Sega still make a game that truly progresses the franchise? I think the answer is yes, but only if they relearn a lesson Sonic 06 tried to teach them. Progress requires risk. Risk requires confidence, and confidence requires accepting that failure is a part of growth. Sonic doesn't need to chase trends, he doesn't need to hide behind nostalgia, and he doesn't need to apologize for ambition. What Sonic needs is conviction. Whether Sega chooses to move forward, retreat further, or continue existing in this creative limbo will define Sonic's future, not just as a franchise, but as a symbol of how the industry treats legacy characters, because Sonic was never about playing it safe. He was about moving forward fast enough that fear couldn't keep up. Whatever direction Sega decides to go, I'm going to play it regardless. I'm a lifelong Sonic fan, but these are just my thoughts on how the franchise can be improved. Thanks for watching. I'm Harlem, and I'll catch you in the next one.